Hi, I'm here with Ken Burnham, Emeritus Professor in the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Conservation Biology here at Colorado State University. And I asked him to come here to just answer a few questions about FW 551, Fish and Wildlife Study Design, and some of his philosophy behind developing it and some of the thoughts he has about current issues in wildlife design. So, first question, Ken, is when you developed this course back in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, there really wasn't anything like it in the field of wildlife biology. It's sort of a combination of basic study design and philosophy of science. So, can you give us a perspective on what your thinking was when you developed it?
Yeah, there wasn't anything like it actually taught in statistics or other places either. I was motivated by so many of these courses they teach in statistics where the title is Design and Analysis. And if you look at the books and you look at what they teach, it's almost overwhelmingly analysis. They say relatively little about design. And what they do say about design is from a mathematical point of view. And that really doesn't help. So they were, still are in my opinion, missing the boat on really focusing on issues of design independent of the issues of analysis.
Nice. Okay.
And leaving all the math out, which to a lot of people doesn't help them understand the principles of design.
Right. Yeah, and so getting to that last point, I mean, you're well known in the field of wildlife biology for your contributions to quantitative analysis, many awards and publications, and some of the highest awards in research. And yet you explicitly decided to leave math out of this course.
Yes.
What was the motivation for that?
It isn't needed to go into the principles and fundamentals of study design. It, to my mind, sort of gets in the way, and it makes it easier to understand the basic ideas and principles, fundamentals, and logic and philosophy of study design, where the goal is to make to learn something, to make an inference beyond just the material you're dealing with. And that issue is really qualitative rather than mathematical. It's the nature of the design and various aspects of it that determine the scope of inference. So I wanted to focus on ideas of the scope of inference you're trying to make without dealing with mathematically how you analyze the data.
Nice. Okay. So if you were talking to the students in the class now, which you are, what are the key concepts that you think students should get from this course when they've completed it?
Quite a bit, but the first thing that comes to my mind, sort of a starting point for this, was effect. We talk about the effect of treatment, the effect of a drug. So I wanted to really focus on what do we mean by the effect of this. And the way I tend to think about that is called potential outcomes. And it's the idea that if I have an experimental unit, say a person, I'm going to give them a drug to help them with getting over a problem, a disease. What I would like to do is know exactly how they would respond to the control, whatever it is, versus the treatment. I would like to be able to give them both. Give you the control and see how you respond, even if I have to back time up quite a bit, and under identical conditions to the same person, give them the treatment and compare the two responses I get from them, and that's the effect for them. It is not what you would get by taking one person, giving them control, and another person giving the treatment, and comparing those. That is confounded by any individual differences going on, and one of the big deals in design of experiments is to eliminate those sorts of confoundings where the two different people or units are involved with the control and different with the treatment. So once they get in mind the effect, then we can start talking about principles of how you best use the material you have to estimate that effect, which is basically blocking. taking your units and finding pairs of them that are as identical as possible. One gets control, one gets treatment. Of course, it extends if you have more treatments. Other aspects of this are that people tend to think of design as how you allocate treatment levels to units. That's part of the design of studies. The other part is there's a treatment design. If there's just control and treatment, not so much, but we may have several factors, so we have multi-factor designs. How do you design the treatments? There's dose response ideas where treatments are quantitative, and we don't just give you drug A, but it's several doses. So part of the design is what dose levels, and you think about that. So there's assignment design, treatment design, there's also measurement design. How do you design taking the measurements? Because often there's multiple measurements repeated in time, or multiple things are measured. And there's issues like taking material, say in agriculture, harvesting material, bringing it into a lab, and doing a whole bunch of analyses for how good the tomatoes are that you've grown, say. But if you would take all the control units and analyze them in week 1, and then you go on vacation, come back, and a month later you analyze all the treatment units, you've confounded time effects where material may decay over time, chemical changes may occur. But people do those sorts of things. So you have to think about, how am I going to do the measurements? There may be multiple labs. Do I, in order to get analysis of my material, I want it quick, I send it to multiple labs. Well, you don't send all your controls to one lab and all your treatments to another lab. People sometimes do that stuff. So those three things, the design, the treatment design, the assignment design, treatment design, and measurement design are important things. Then we get into this other stuff somewhat quickly. What is a true experiment versus a quasi-experiment? What distinguishes those? I expect them to be able to do that. What about sampling studies versus observational studies versus other sorts of studies, strengths and weaknesses of these studies, why you would do one versus another. Issues that come in that affect you, that are not talked about in the usual design but may be quite important. Safety out in the field, logistics, ethics. I don't talk about them. I didn't talk about a lot in there, but I say they come into play and may have a great deal to do with your design. So I expect them to be aware of this stuff. I expect them to be able to say what's a design, what is a confounding factor, why these are big deals. That's probably, there are others, but they're talked about in there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Nice. Okay. And you mentioned something there when you were talking about that in terms of the going back in time, and it
Yes.
reminded me of the God experiment that you use in some of your early lectures in the class. And I've always wondered where that idea came from. Did you read it somewhere? Is it something you just popped into your head in terms of thinking about this stuff?
It popped into my head more. I did not read it somewhere. What I have read is people like the statistician at Harvard, Don Rubin, who's done a lot of work on this potential outcomes idea, which pretty much has to be the case. I have to be able to think that I have one potential outcome from this unit. If I give it the control, I'm going to get a different response that I give it the treatment. If that's not the case, what am I doing this for? So then you realize that that's all fine and good, but there are interactions that go on, especially in ecology and environmental things, that there are external conditions. The particular times I do this, who's doing it, any chemicals used, am I doing it in California or Colorado or somewhere else, that all of these extra conditions may affect things. And so what I'd like to be able to do is give you the control, back up time, give you the treatment, but repeat that under various environmental conditions to see if the effects I'm getting vary by what external conditions and covariates that I may or may not be able to control, so I get a full picture of the effect of this treatment, find out that it works in a situation that had a wet winter or cold winter but not a dry winter or whatever. These things come up. I've seen that sort of thing in various things I've been involved with people, that the responses you get depend on things you can't control, and you'd like to know that. So at least people think about this, that the effects I'm getting from my experiment might not have held up under different conditions. And what is the scope of inference of what I am doing? And I'd like people to think a lot about the scope of inference. So that so-called God experiment was pretty much, I had not seen it anywhere else. It came into my mind as the optimal thing I would like to be able to do. And of course, you can't, but then you see how close can I get, and often not very close to what you really want to do.
Right. Yeah, I've always thought that was a great way of kind of getting these concepts across. When we were talking earlier, you had mentioned a study that really intrigued me, and that was the effects of vitamin C on overall health that Linus Pauling did, a very famous Nobel laureate. And you pointed out how he really missed the boat on that experiment. Maybe you could just talk about that.
Yes, it's in the literature. I do not recall if he was doing it or he got involved, where he got involved in, but it's fairly well known that this was done, and he found out that the children who had been given extra dose of vitamin C actually improved their general health and well-being. And so he thought, wow, vitamin C is a wonder drug, and everyone should be taking extra doses of vitamin C. But the people that looked at the experiment, either then or later, found out that the children used in this, I believe it was done in England, all of them were already malnourished. They did not have adequate diet. All of them did not have adequate vitamin C, so they were not representative of the entire population. And indeed, if you are malnourished, you do not have enough of something your body needs a little bit of, vitamin C, and you get it, you might expect your health to improve relative to those that didn't get it, and that happened. So he made an inference that wasn't justified there. His material, the material being used, people being used in that study, were not representative of the population he wanted to make inference to.
Right.
Very serious sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and an easy trap to fall into.
Yes.
So, in wrapping things up, why don't you talk a little bit about what you're up to these days? What are you thinking about?
Retired 6.5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Wound down a bit. When you're emeritus, you don't just drop everything. So now I'm trying to be not too involved in things. I still am a little bit. Well, in the northern spotted owl stuff, we have a draft manuscript which is in revision. I'm not too involved in the revision. Was involved in leading in the work that, in the analysis that produced it. That's one thing. The thing that I am involved in still is model selection issues, information theoretic, and then a recent publication in Ecology, a forum on p-values. Burnham and Anderson were presented the concept of some ideas there, that there is a nice alternative to p-values. Statisticians generally should know it. They don't tend to use it. It is an evidence ratio that quantifies the strength of evidence about, say, if you want to do a null and an alternative. This will tell you the actual strength of evidence in your data, which is not represented by a p-value because it's a strange beast. And so I'm interested in, I would love it if people would start using that, this evidence ratio, and we mentioned it in there. And I happen to know that the American Statistical Association, quite independent of anything I'm doing, has established a little study group internally there to come up with a policy statement from statisticians on the use of p-values and all the problems with them. And I've communicated with them these ideas. They said they might get back to me. I hope they do, because there is an alternative to p-values which is sensible, easy to do, easy to use, in my opinion better, and the profession has missed the boat terribly by not going there.
Nice. And where is that going to be published?
Well, the one I referred to that I did was published in Ecology, the journal, about a year and a half ago, nice. 2014.
All right, we'll look that up. Hey, thanks so much for coming and talking to me.
Welcome. Thank you.
And this has been great.
Yeah. Good luck
Thanks.
with the course.